There are generals who win battles in the open field, who maneuver across broad plains, strike at exposed flanks, and are celebrated for speed and initiative. And then there are generals of an entirely different kind. Men forged not in open countryside, but in rubble and smoke, and the savage intimacy of urban combat. Men who inherit a situation of absolute, seemingly irreversible catastrophe and find within it, through sheer force of will and tactical invention, the means not only to survive, but to transform inevitable defeat into one of the most consequential victories in military history. Vasily Chuikov was one of those men. Born in 1900 in a small village south of Moscow, the son of a peasant family, Chuikov joined the Red Army as a teenage messenger boy during the Russian Civil War and spent the next 2 decades climbing through the ranks of an institution being systematically hollowed out by Stalin's purges. He served as a military advisor in China during the Sino-Japanese War, gaining first-hand understanding of combat in built-up areas. He commanded a combined arms army during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940, an experience that exposed him to the particular nightmares of fighting against prepared defenses in terrain that negated Soviet numerical and mechanized superiority. By the summer of 1942, when the full weight of the German summer offensive had driven deep into southern Russia and Stalingrad stood directly in the path of the most powerful armored thrust in the history of warfare, Chuikov was still a relatively obscure general, competent, experienced, and unspectacular. He would not remain obscure for long. What follows are 3 of the most extraordinary defensive masterpieces in the history of warfare, 3 acts of operational and tactical genius that together saved the Soviet Union from collapse, destroyed the finest field army Germany possessed, and changed the entire course of the Second World War. Move 1. The hugging tactic. Neutralizing German superiority from the inside. When Chuikov was summoned to the headquarters of the Stalingrad front on the 12th of September 1942 and given command of the 62nd Army, he inherited what amounted to a dying force. The army had been fighting continuous rearguard actions for weeks, losing men and equipment with every passing day. By the time Chuikov took command, it numbered fewer than 55,000 men, was desperately short of ammunition and artillery, and held a strip of Stalingrad's western bank that in some places was barely a kilometer deep, a sliver of devastated urban landscape wedged between the German advance and the half-mile width of the Volga River. There was nowhere to retreat to. Boats crossing the Volga under constant German air attack were the army's only lifeline. By every reasonable military assessment, the 62nd Army was on the verge of annihilation. The German forces pressing against them came equipped with the full apparatus of modern combined arms warfare, massed armor, mechanized infantry, Luftwaffe close air support, and concentrated artillery, all coordinated simultaneously against a chosen point of attack. The Blitzkrieg system depended on space. Artillery needed room to register. Air support needed the ability to distinguish friend from enemy. Tanks needed open ground or broad streets to maneuver. Take away that space and the system began to break down. Chuikov understood this perfectly, and rather than attempting the kind of conventional linear defense that the Germans excelled at shattering, he devised something entirely different, a doctrine born of desperation and refined into a precise tactical system that would be studied in military academies for generations. He called it, in essence, hugging the enemy. The principle was ruthlessly simple. Push Soviet defensive positions to within grenade-throwing distance of the German front line, in some cases within 50 meters, sometimes less. Fight in the same buildings, on the same floors, sometimes in the same rooms as the enemy. Create a front so physically intertwined with the German positions that any artillery strike or air attack would fall equally on both sides. It was a doctrine that demanded extraordinary courage and imposed brutal casualties on its practitioners. Chuikov made no pretense about this. He told his commanders plainly every soldier must feel that he has nowhere and no right to retreat. The Volga was behind them. But by eliminating the space the German system needed to function, Chuikov had neutralized the single greatest advantage his enemy possessed. German artillery that could pulverize a defensive line at 500 meters became nearly useless at 30. Stuka pilots whose precision attacks had destroyed Soviet formations in open steppe could not bomb a target indistinguishable from their own men on the ground. Tank commanders whose vehicles were lethal in open country became trapped in rubble-choked alleys where Soviet anti-tank teams could approach from any direction. To complement the tactic, Chuikov broke his force down from conventional large unit formations into storm groups, small, self-sufficient assault teams of 6 to 8 men carrying automatic weapons, grenades, knives, and entrenching tools. These teams moved through buildings not by entering through doors and windows, but by blasting holes through walls, pushing from room to room through the structure itself, maintaining constant pressure, never allowing the Germans a moment of stillness in which to reorganize en masse for a counterattack. The effect was profound and deeply disorienting. German officers began filing reports describing a form of combat for which their training had not prepared them. Soldiers who had advanced hundreds of miles across Russia in fluid formation now found themselves fighting for single rooms in burned-out factories, unable to use their heaviest weapons, unable to call in air support, unable to maneuver. The high-tempo operational art of the Blitzkrieg had been compressed into something almost medieval, brutal. Room-to-room violence, where men killed each other with spades and sharpened steel in smoke-filled darkness. Chuikov had not simply found a way to defend Stalingrad. He had found a way to negate the most powerful military doctrine of the 20th century, using nothing but terrain, discipline, and the ferocious willingness of his soldiers to close with the enemy and refuse to release him. Move number 2, the factory district, holding the impossible ground. By the first weeks of October 1942, the hugging doctrine had stabilized the front sufficiently to prevent the immediate collapse of the 62nd Army. But the Germans had not stopped pressing. General Paulus, commanding the German 6th Army, understood that time was working against him. The Russian winter was approaching. His supply lines stretched hundreds of miles across the steppe, and somewhere behind the Soviet lines, his intelligence analysts were picking up ominous signs of a massive buildup whose purpose was not yet fully clear. Paulus intensified his attacks, concentrating his finest infantry divisions against the most critical section of the entire Stalingrad front, the industrial district in the northern part of the city. 3 massive complexes dominated the area: the Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, the Barricady arms factory, and the Krasny Oktyabr Red October steel plant. Built to the enormous Soviet industrial standard of the 1930s, these were not merely buildings, but vast, cathedral-scale structures of reinforced concrete and heavy steel, occupying blocks of urban ground the size of small towns. Their walls could absorb artillery fire that would have obliterated ordinary buildings. Their internal layouts, the machine halls, furnace rooms, overhead crane gantries, and labyrinthine sub-basements created a 3-dimensional combat environment of almost incomprehensible complexity. And they were connected by a network of rail lines, workshops, and storage yards that interlocked fields of fire and cover in ways that heavily favored a determined defender. Chuikov recognized from the beginning that the factory district was the key to everything. As long as those complexes held, his army retained a coherent northern anchor and continued access to the Volga crossing points that kept it supplied and reinforced. If they fell, the 62nd Army would be split, its northern elements severed from the main body, and the entire defensive position would likely unravel. He reinforced the complex with every man and gun he could spare, embedding artillery pieces directly inside the factory buildings, positioning anti-tank guns in ground-floor windows, routing his storm groups through the internal passageways of the structures themselves. What followed through October and into November was arguably the most intense sustained urban combat in the history of warfare. The German 14th Panzer Corps and several elite infantry divisions threw themselves at the factory complex day after day with concentrated savagery. The tractor factory changed hands multiple times, seized by German infantry, retaken by Soviet counterattack, fought over floor by floor as both sides poured men into the attrition of the industrial halls. At the height of the fighting, German and Soviet troops occupied different floors of the same building simultaneously, separated by a single concrete ceiling through which grenades were dropped and through which the sounds of combat above and below were a constant, terrifying presence. Chuikov managed this battle from a command post on the banks of the Volga itself, a position so close to the fighting that his headquarters was regularly under direct small arms and mortar fire. Several of his staff officers were killed at their desks. Communication lines were cut and restored dozens of times. Yet through this chaos, he maintained a clarity of operational purpose that was remarkable. He identified the critical points within the complex where a German breakthrough would be most dangerous and reinforced those points first, even when it meant stripping men from sectors also under heavy attack. He rotated his storm groups continuously, understanding that the psychological weight of this kind of fighting was as corrosive to fighting effectiveness as physical casualties, and that men needed to be cycled out of the most intense sectors before they broke entirely. By mid-November, the factory district had still not fallen. The barricade was partly in German hands. The tractor factory had been overrun and then partially retaken. The Red October plant remained contested, but the line had held. The 62nd Army, battered to a skeleton of its former strength and supplied only by desperate nighttime Volga crossings under German artillery fire, was still fighting, and in holding the factory district throughout the autumn. Chuikov had done something whose full significance would only become apparent within days. He had kept the German Sixth Army's attention, its energy, and its irreplaceable combat power fixed on the city while, less than 50 miles to the north and south, Zhukov and Vasilevsky were quietly assembling the forces that would change everything. Move 3 holding the pocket, refusing to break while the trap closed, on the 19th of November 1942, Operation Uranus was launched. Soviet armored spearheads struck north and south of Stalingrad, smashing through the poorly equipped Romanian armies on the flanks of the German Sixth Army and racing to complete the encirclement. 4 days later, on the 23rd of November, the two converging forces linked up near Savetsky, close to Kalach on the Don. Over 250,000 German and Axis troops were trapped inside the Stalingrad pocket. But the encirclement was not yet secure. For it to hold for Uranus to become the decisive catastrophe Zhukov had designed, the ring had to be maintained against two simultaneous and dangerous threats. From the outside, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein was assembling Army Group Don for a massive relief operation, Operation Winter Storm, intended to drive through the Soviet encirclement from the southwest and open a corridor to the trapped Sixth Army. At its closest point, Manstein's advance force closed to within roughly 48 kilometers of the pocket. Had a corridor been established, the Sixth Army could have been supplied, reinforced, and potentially extracted. The encirclement would have been broken, and hundreds of thousands of Germany's best soldiers would have lived to fight another day. From the inside, the Sixth Army itself remained a powerful force, still capable of fighting its way toward Manstein's relief column if it moved quickly and with determination. The distance was not impossible for a determined armored breakout. What stood between the success of that escape and the completion of the most decisive Soviet victory of the war was, among other things, Chuikov's 62nd Army not passively, but in an actively and operationally critical sense. Because the Sixth Army could not simultaneously conduct a fighting breakout toward Manstein and maintain the forces needed to contain an aggressive enemy inside the city. Every regiment Paulus needed for a breakout was pinned down fighting Chuikov's storm groups in the rubble of the factory district and the ravines along the Volga. Every battalion that might have driven southwest toward Manstein's spearhead was instead fighting for a single floor of the Red October plant or a stretch of railway embankment in the northern suburbs. Chuikov understood this dynamic completely. The mission of the 62nd Army in the weeks following the encirclement was not simply to hold on, it was to hold on with such relentless aggression that the 6th Army could never freeze sufficient forces to attempt the breakout that might save it. He intensified pressure on the German positions inside the city, launching constant probing attacks. Exploiting every weakness, keeping the Germans in a continuous state of reactive emergency that made any large-scale internal redeployment nearly impossible to execute. As December wore on, Manstein's advance stalled and was pushed back. Göring's promise to supply the pocket by air collapsed catastrophically. The Luftwaffe was delivering a fraction of the daily tonnage the 6th Army needed to survive. General Oberst Paulus sent increasingly desperate telegrams to Hitler requesting permission to attempt a breakout. Hitler refused every one. The 6th Army was to hold its position as a fortress. On the 30th of January 1943, Hitler promoted Paulus to Field Marshal, a signal that carried its own grim message, since no German Field Marshal had ever been taken prisoner, and Hitler expected Paulus to die rather than surrender. Paulus surrendered the following day. On the 2nd of February 1943, the last German resistance in the pocket ended. Over 90,000 survivors, all that remained of a force that had once numbered more than 300,000, marched into Soviet captivity. Fewer than 6,000 would ever return to Germany. Chuikov's 62nd Army had been at the center of every phase of the battle. In recognition, it was redesignated the 8th Guards Army, a title it carried with it through Ukraine, through Poland, and all the way to Berlin, where its soldiers would be among the first to raise the Soviet flag over the ruins of the Reichstag in May 1945. Vasily Chuikov survived the war, rose to Marshal of the Soviet Union, and served as Commander-in-Chief of Soviet Ground Forces. He died in 1982, at the age of 82, and was buried, at his own request, not in Moscow, but at Mamayev Kurgan, the hill above Stalingrad, whose soil had been so saturated with shrapnel that the grass would not grow back for years. It was where his men had died. It was where he chose to rest. The doctrine he forged in those ruins: close urban combat, small aggressive teams. Denying the enemy the space his weapons require became foundational to Soviet military thinking for decades and is studied by armies to this day. What Chuikov proved in Stalingrad was simple and devastating: that a force with its back to a river in a burning city could defeat the finest army in the world, not by matching its strength for strength, but by pulling it close, holding it there, and never letting go. Thank you for watching. Who do you think was the greatest defensive commander of the Second World War? And which commander should we cover next? If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing. See you again soon.